And your husband, Stefan, a second-generation survivor. John Pashong, SLO County Supervisor. Rick Scott, SLO Police Chief. And Nathan Williams was maybe if he was able to make it from Paso Robles School Board. So I wanted to recognize those names. It's very important to us that you take the time to come and learn with us. Again, thank you for your presence. Please silence your phones. Thank you.
On a day like today, you may not want the words of Primo Levi. You who live secure in your warm houses to find hot food and friendly faces, consider whether this is a man who labors in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for a crust of bread, who dies at a yes or no. Consider whether this is a woman with send these words to you. Engrave these words to you. Engrave them on your hearts when you are in your house, when you walk on your way, when you go to bed, and when you rise. Repeat them to your children, or may your house crumble. Disease render you powerless, and your offspring avert their faces from you. Consider this. Thank you. And now, as we've heard this great introduction, my dear friend, colleague, teacher, and mentor, access to all of so many in our county and in this world, please, Paul, the bima is yours. Oh, yes. Oh. No. Featured speaker, Paul Wolf. Yes. Relax.
I have the mic.
The bima is yours.
I'm gonna speak from this chair. It's a great. Thank you very much, Rabbi Micah, and thank you very much to both congregations. It's an honor to be invited here on this important date, this very, very important date. For me, it's today's the 17th, 27th. On the 20th, exactly a week ago, marks the 84th anniversary of a very important date in my life. And it was actually a very important date in history. Can anybody recall what that date might be? 20th of April, 1939. There was wild celebration in Hamburg as we boarded the ship to finally leave Hamburg forever. And I thought, boy, they're really celebrating our leaving. They're really getting rid of us. There was dancing in the streets. There was confetti from the buildings. But I learned it really wasn't for us. It was not only celebration in Hamburg, it was really all over the nation. It happened to be the 50th birthday of their beloved leader, Adolf Hitler. The 50th birthday, that's what they were celebrating, not our leaving. In fact, we weren't even celebrating our leaving. We were rather reluctant to leave at that time, but we were very fortunate to get out at that time. I'm especially grateful that there are so many representatives here of the school district, because my wife and I have been talking to groups for many, many years in Vienna, Hamburg, Berlin, and certainly in the 4 high schools in this county. In fact, this last Thursday, I talked to an ethnic studies class of Jeff Lamb in Paso Robles High School. And well, it really wasn't his ethnic studies class alone. Turned out 150 kids showed up, and they stayed an hour after school because I guess they were really captivated. And I've talked to a lot of different groups, but I've never been quite as moved as by that audience last week. They were very, very attentive. It's the only ethnic studies class in the whole county, I think in the whole high school system in our county. Jeff is an unusually dedicated teacher to it, and the students really asked some very, very pertinent questions. And I know we're commemorating the Holocaust here, but my daughter keeps telling me to don't talk about history, just talk about your own experiences, because that's all people want. You all know the history of this area. But I try to talk also, my talk really, as the slide shows, is prejudice and discrimination, because we've had many years of it too. We've had over 250 years of it. Germany's had only 12 years to deal with. And maybe they've dealt with it in a more mature way than we've dealt with our 250 years of it. But we, at the same time as Hitler was writing Mein Kampf when he was arrested for his failed takeover in 1923, when he was sentenced to 2 years in jail, of which he only served 9 months, to write that book, My Struggles, he learned a great deal from the Jim Crow laws of the United States. He admired that the U.S. were able to free slaves after the Civil War, but prevent them from voting. So one of the first, very shortly after he took over in 1935, he got the Nuremberg laws passed, the 2 Nuremberg laws, which first of all divided the German citizens into two types of citizens: the Reich citizens and the preservation of the pureness of German blood, that there would be no more infidelities and Muslims and all types of minorities and discriminations, particularly Jews. And of course, we all know Hitler didn't invent anti-Semitism. It was there a long time before that. However, my father was in the First World War, fighting valiantly for Germany on the 4 years on the front. In France, he got the Iron Cross, was wounded, was a much respected officer on the front, and did not experience anti-Semitism at that time. So he was not particularly upset when Hitler came to power in 1935. His brother was a little wiser, and in 1937 moved his family to London. His sister moved their family to Paris and started a successful bakery in Paris. My father's other brother was a doctor and practiced medicine in France. But my father thought, with my war record and such, and I've established a business here, and I have a lot of friends here, I belong to a lot of groups here. Hitler is in power now, but we'll tough it out, and I think we all went through this on a recent episode in our country too. We'll just tough it out and try to survive this particular regime. He was very wrong, very, very wrong. One of the first things that, can we go to the passport? one of the first things that Hitler did was identify us as Jews. Huh?
The passport, the one with the passport.
The passport, yeah. I have it here. I have my German passport here. Still, I maintain that. When all males were given the middle name of Israel and all females were given the middle name of Sarah as a means of identifying us. So that was a clear indication of where things were going. And still my father thought that he could until Kristallnacht, he really was, and still my father thought that he could until Kristallnacht, he really visited, we gave some talks in Berlin and in Hamburg, and as we landed at the Berlin airport, and you have to go through the controls. I've got a German passport here. Why can't I get in the country with this? And she said, "Don't you dare show that passport." I said, "No, I'm going to dare." So I showed him the passport, and this poor 21-year-old kid at the control, he looked at this thing and he really didn't know what to make of it. So he took it over to his supervisor. They both shook their heads. And then he came back to me and said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I'm going to have you arrested. It's illegal to show the swastika in Germany today." So I said, "No, don't bother having me arrested. Here's my American passport." You know, but he would have probably arrested me. And at least that passport didn't get me anywhere at all. The next one is what? 'Cause even at this time, if the U.S. was to get involved of skirmish there, would they support Hitler? There was considerable clamor in this country for supporting many of Hitler's ideas. Go on, the next one. This is Kristallnacht?
Slave auction.
Yeah, and it's just another example of how the U.S. was treating other human beings was not that far above what was about to happen in Germany. It wasn't quite mass extermination, but people were being sold just like cattle, like products. And my opening as a 9-year-old to this whole issue didn't happen really till the 7th of November in 1938, when a young fella, Herschel Greenspan, 18-year-old German Jewish student studying in Paris, went out into the streets of Paris, bought himself a pistol, and the next day marched into the German embassy in Paris with the complete intent of assassinating the German ambassador to France. Why did he want to? And that's also why Auschwitz is in Poland. But the Germans said, "We really don't want to keep the Jews here. Go back home. Go back to Poland." So they went back, but Poland wouldn't let them in. Poland didn't want them either. So they were caught on the border between Poland and Germany in a primitive tent city in very miserable conditions in winter, not getting enough heat or food or anything, barely surviving there. And when the son heard about this, he wanted to do something about it. That's the only way he could think of doing it. Well, he didn't get to the ambassador. He shot a minor official, Ernest von Rath, who died the next day. The German population naturally was quite incensed about this. Here's a Jew in Paris killing a German official, and the population was quite incensed. Hitler noticed this immediately, and this is exactly what he needed. He told his Gestapo and stormtroopers to don't wear your uniforms, go out there and help the public, vandalize synagogues, wreck synagogues, burn them, vandalize all kinds of Jewish stores that you can get. Therefore, the name Kristallnacht, Crystal Night, because of all the glass that was broken that night. And an edict went out on the radio immediately that all male Jews over 18 would be arrested. Well, we heard this. My father fully expected to be arrested there. Except he wanted, if he was going to be arrested, he wanted to go together with his brother-in-law who lived across town. They decided to, so he went across town to be together with Wilhelm Guggenheim, his brother-in-law. And sure enough, around midnight or so, there's a big clomping on the front door. The coat was stuffed full of my father's medals, papers, citations, the Iron Cross, everything, hoping to have them leave my father alone. And she realized she had no choice. She gave them the address. Sure enough, they marched across town and arrested. For my father there had served under him for 4 years in France. And had great respect for my father as a commanding officer, and managed to get him released after 5 days in jail there, so let him go home. So that many people were kept for months and months. But this opened my father's eyes that if my family of 5 is going to survive at all, I better make all haste to get the hell out of the country. And I don't know if you can appreciate this. This is a very hard thing. My father was 52 years old, had established a business, thought that his family had some security and some livelihood there. He was the only one in the family who could speak some English, but still, to make that decision at 52 to simply leave hearth and home, to go into a different country with no prospects of a job or anything, a different language, a different culture, to give up everything that you've known all your life, that's a horrendous decision. I mean, things have to get pretty dire before you make that, and that's probably why my father never followed the examples of his siblings to leave earlier. I mean, how many of us today would like to have to make that decision if we'd have to leave California here? It's a horrendous decision. I admired my father for that, and his life was never the same here. Never the same. We were very fortunate to finally, on April 20th, on Hitler's birthday the next year, get passage to go to London. What? Oh yeah, I put in an Auschwitz slide there because this really started at that time. Auschwitz was at that time still a concentration camp. It wasn't an extermination camp till later. In 1941, Hitler called a conference in a wonderful seaside resort in Germany called Wannsee. And he gave these 15 top officials the job of getting a final solution for the Jewish problem. He said, we've tried immigration, but hell, look, nobody in the world really wants them. Nobody's really opened their arms to them. So we're going to go from emigration to elimination. And that started the concentration camps being used as gas chambers then in 1941. And still at that time, if you recall, we are not in the war yet. We are not in the war yet. The war was over 2 years and 2 months old before we got it. And historians today are still debating the fact whether would we have ever gotten into the war if it wasn't for Pearl Harbor. I think you can debate that till hell freezes over, whether we would have ever really gotten in, because America first, and anything that, our involvement in Ukraine is very, very questioned today for similar reasons. Anyway, go on.
And there's the Holocaust.
What's this?
The Holocaust, it just says genocide.
What?
Genocide, Holocaust. And then the picture
My father having to make a decision. Yeah, that was my father's picture in the First World War, and his wedding picture, right. When Germany was split, a few years after the war, I got drafted and sent back to Germany. Yeah, go on.
then Stolperstein.
Yeah, I'll go back to the Stolperstein a little bit later, but that's in front of our house. The house technically belonged to my mother's mother, who refused to go with us. She could have gone out with us, but she felt very German. She was old and somewhat a little bit overweight, and she just did not want to leave the house and the hearth. She was murdered in the concentration camp, as this little paving stone shows. This is a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter paving stone called Stolperstein. It's a brass paving stone, very small. On it is her name, her birth date, when and where she was murdered in Bergen-Belsen in a concentration camp, in a very, very cruel way, we found out later. She was simply like a lot of people. They were put in cattle cars and shipped to this camp. And the cattle car was never opened. They were just left in there, and they, of course, died in there. It was a horrible way to go. Occult synagogues and churches and civic groups that have gathered the money, they're not put on there by the government. Streets, and they're in Belgium, they're in Austria, and they're in Germany. They're quite. It's a powerful way of remembering that. And the Germans have really tried hard to. The subsequent generations in Germany have been torn between two means of thinking. So there are many who want to forget that part of history. Let's move on. Let's think about tomorrow, not the past. We don't want to remember that portion of our history. And there are others from that generation who say, no, we have to face it. We have to own up to what happened. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to deal with it. Meet the Press this morning had an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger, who talked about his Nazi father. And he wasn't proud of that. He said, we never talked about my father's history at home. We never ever talked. He didn't learn anything about Auschwitz or anything till he got to the United States, till many years later. This was a portion that was just never talked about, although his father was a committed Nazi who enlisted in 1938, but was not involved in any atrocities. He simply was a soldier on the front, fighting for Germany. Yeah. Are we at the Kindertransport?
Yeah.
Okay, my sisters, as soon as, right after Kristallnacht, in fact, within a month after Kristallnacht, my parents put my sisters on something called the Kindertransport. You may have heard of this. I belong to the Kindertransport organization now. This was a means of, England was the only country that really seemed to get the message as to what was happening. And a law was proposed in Parliament to have 10,000 Jewish children adopted by British families. It wouldn't cost the government anything, except transportation maybe, that families would simply adopt these children. But it was very controversial in the British Parliament, and they really had a hard time getting this thing passed. And it passed only with two major conditions. One, children could only be from 0 to 16. No child over 16, because then they might be employed and they might take jobs away. And the whole country, America and England, had a lot of unemployment at this time. It was 1939. And the second thing was that children had to go unaccompanied by adults. Unaccompanied by adults. Now, this was very hard. This meant that the parents had to give up their children, never knowing whether they would ever see them again. And about 70% of these children never did see their parents again. And I belong to the association today. Today, these 10,000 children that survived is now several 100,000 children and grandchildren that belong to this organization that have survived and been born with this. America heard about this law and said, well, if the British can do it for 10,000, we can at least get 20,000 over here. And a Roger Wagner Act was proposed in Congress to do the same thing with 20,000 children to come to America. And some congressman got up and seemed to convince the rest of Congress, or at least the majority, that it was against the laws of God and man to separate a mother from her children, and therefore we won't do it at all. So there was never a Kindertransport organization in America. But my wife went out on this. My wife was, and her mother, her father had died much earlier in the war, and her mother was a single mother living in Vienna with Marion. And Marion was playing on the street one day in Vienna as an 8-year-old kid, saw a bunch of kids getting in line, signing up for something, and so she decided to get in line with them and sign up for something. 3 days later, the mother got a letter saying, if you're still interested in the Kindertransport, please come to this and this meeting at this time, and we'll talk about that. And a lot of them, her mother didn't know what it was all about, but she went. And she finally put Marion on this Kindertransport. She was on the first Kindertransport out of Vienna on the 10th of December in 1938, the 10th of December 1938. And Marion never quite got over admiring her mother for having the courage to do that, to give up an only child like that, not knowing what the future would hold whatsoever. And so we caught this in the newsreel, this picture, we checked with the newsreels after Sky Bergman here had made a film about us called Lives Well Lived here, that where she did a lot of research, and she caught this picture of Marion arriving in England, caught on the newsreel clip, very, very lonely, very confused, and very disoriented. And all the kids at that time were identified not by name, but by number. So I'm wearing her number around my neck, because we always used to give these talks together, and this way I feel that she's participating in it too. She was number 211, and she got to this camp in Devonshire, and for 10 days there were people coming in right every day to adopt children, and afterwards she told me she kept wondering. She says, 10 days, she says, what's wrong with me? Why is nobody taking me? I don't get it. Well, it turned out that 10 days was really extremely short time to stay there, and it wasn't long at all. But finally, a Quaker family from north of England in York adopted her, a wonderful family, and she grew up as a Quaker, went to a Quaker boarding school, and pestered every single day, pestered her adopted parents to get my mother out. You got to get my mother out. Help get my mother out. We've got to get my mother out. And they finally did succeed. Just a few weeks before the war started, they got her a maid's permit for a hotel in London. And she worked as a hotel maid in London when she first came over. We finally got her even to America. Linda and the kids knew her very well. She lived here in San Luis Obispo with us and got to be 93 years old. So that was very fortunate. Go ahead. What's the name?
And then I was saying about today child refugees. Is that on that slide?
The what?
Today child refugees today.
Today's child refugee.
Yeah, I don't know, just said it. Yeah, it's okay. Then the next one's Vienna, 1938.
Oh, this is what Marion saw in before she left Vienna. She saw the Jews on the streets being forced to scrub the sidewalk with toothbrushes just before she got on the Kindertransport. This was before the war, but Vienna, Austria was, of course, annexed a year earlier, and the Germans marched into Austria, and they were greeted with open arms and not a shot being fired. It was they were very, very welcomed in Austria at the time. Go ahead.
Which side for the USA?
Huh? Oh yeah, this was 2 months after the war started. In the middle of New York, there were parades like this, very much in support of Hitler still. So which way we would go was still a question. You know, it wasn't until the 7th of December that was decided. And I often mention that how unjust it was to immediately incarcerate all the Japanese into camps, because even if they were born here and their parents were born here and their grandparents were born here, it didn't make any difference. And there was very serious talk at the time of doing the same with the Germans. With the Germans, we were considered German. They didn't differentiate Jewishness or not. We were considered German also. But the trouble is, we looked too much like everybody else, and they never did put in camp. It would have been very hard to start rounding us up and putting us in camps like they did with the Japanese. But there was a great deal of injustice done by America toward the Japanese at that time by simply blaming what you're. You know, when I talk to the students on discrimination, you know, I usually ask them, you know, have you ever been discriminated against? And they all have. I think most of us have been. Most of us in here probably have just been discriminated against, or even dished out discrimination, both sides of it. But when a government starts telling you to discriminate, I mean, we discriminate on an individual basis, and we allow it, and it's part of life. It's part of human judgment. But when a government tells you to discriminate against a particular group of people, that immediately should be a warning that, hey, there's something very wrong there. Go ahead.
Racism, U.S. racism. racism. But and Martin Luther King's greatest problem is silence.
Huh?
The Martin Luther King quote, Martin Luther King, U.S. racism, it says the greatest problem is silence.
Oh, are we at that point?
Yeah.
All right, well, what happened to Elie Wiesel?
Uh,
There was Elie Wiesel slide there.
no, not yet. It's coming, or it's coming. Sorry. A
Huh?
little out of order, maybe. It's coming. It's coming in a couple more slides. Sorry.
This is
Wanna go?
U.S. racism?
Unfortunately, it is here.
We still have it here. I mean, yeah, I think that's one thing that's why it's so important to talk about this period. And I realize in the audience here, this is a little different. I'm speaking to the converted here. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't know about this period or hopefully hasn't learned from this period. But we still need to learn a lot. And today, last year there was 12% of U.S. population denying Holocaust ever happened. I hear this year it's up to 15%. So this is on the increase. There seems to be an increase in denying that the Holocaust ever happened. And also, I think something like 10% believes that it's instigated by it not only never happened, but it's invented by the Jews for sympathy. I mean, these are ridiculous things, but on the other hand, there's still a lot of people that don't believe we have a legitimate president. So what's truth and how much unreality is really being actually believed by people is frightening. It's very frightening. And the further we get away from this period, I'm afraid, I have a great passion still in my declining years here. It gives me some motivation for living, is to keep talking about this thing. But I doubt that my children will. I doubt that this will carry on from generation to generation. So it's going to decrease with time, which means it gets further on in memory, and then the lessons to it. Really, hopefully we'll keep celebrating Yom HaShoah every year, and it certainly gets imprinted in Jewish memories, but more so than in others. I don't know if you're running across that too, Rabbi.
I actually am seeing people very attentive and certainly committed to continuing hearing you. And if we can decline as graciously as you are in this moment, keep on going. Please.
I have a slide here on
The memorial in Berlin. Yeah.
yeah, that was, I wanted to mention that a little because they took over four acres of very prime, very expensive real estate in the heart of Berlin to create these 2,711 stalia, they call them. They're 3-foot by 7-foot concrete slabs laid out on a grid with no particular axes, no particular direction. The top of them is level, but the ground underneath them dips down, and so some are 12 inches high, and some are 15 feet high. And the idea is to walk through these alleys, which they would have liked to have made only 2 feet wide, to feel alone as you're walking.
Yes.
They had to make them 5 feet wide to accommodate wheelchairs and everything else. And it was designed by an American architect with the idea of having a memorial, not that you don't just stand there and stare at and look at and read something, but you physically engage in. You have to wander through this thing, and supposedly wandering through these 4 acres, it's supposed to make you think. and as you were wandering in these alleyways. I personally don't think it's very successful. They thought that the Holocaust, it wasn't done till 2006. The Holocaust, they thought, was such a horrendous event that it needs no identification, no marks, no name, no nothing. It's simply there.
Yes.
And I think they missed the boat on that.
Yeah.
And so the city had to go underneath and build a large underground display hall where they have lots of exhibits now and display cases and glass cases and all kinds of explanations. What's the matter? Huh?
Elie Wiesel.
Yeah, and also kids tend to use it as a place to go play hide and go seek.
They do.
So it's the Stolpersteine to me are much more powerful than this huge memorial, which is probably the largest memorial anywhere in that respect. And now people have to be told that this is a Holocaust memorial, because otherwise it's simply there in the city, and nobody knows what it is.
Agreed.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a grid, yeah. Elie Wiesel. Yeah, you want to read that, Linda? Could you mind?
Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, which has turned my life into one long night. 7 times cursed and 7 times healed. Never shall I forget those flames which consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget those moments which murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to dust. Never. I still believe people are really good at heart.
Well, he did finally come back to his God, and he went on to write 86 other books and live a rich life. But he spent only 1 year, year in the camp. Man's Search for Meaning
Viktor Frankl.
by Viktor Frankl. He spent 2 years in the camp. A couple of books that are and another one who spent 3 years in a camp wrote, I forgot the name of the author, wrote a book called The Tattooist. He determined that he was going to survive the camp somehow, and surviving meant to him and to many people meant that you had to cooperate with your captors. So he became the camp tattooist, of tattooing all the inmates with numbs on their forearms. And he did survive that way. And he wrote about it. So there's a book, that's a book of 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years in a camp. There's 3 very, very powerful books. And then I think we're going to the Statue of Liberty.
The Voyage of the Damned.
Oh, I threw that in there because,
It's an important chapter.
well, yeah, it's interesting. There was a movie made in 1976 called The Voyage of the Damned. And I only threw that in there because it was a month before our ship left. So it was extremely fortunate that we were allowed to go through. This ship was not allowed to go through. It left with 938 passengers from Hamburg to Cuba. And it got there with 938 Jewish passengers. And when it got to Cuba, Cuba said, no, we don't want the Jews here. We won't. They had visas. So the captain, who was very sympathetic to the passengers, actually, a German captain, said, all right, I'll try Miami. Miami said the same thing. We don't want them here. No, we won't let them in here. So he had orders to take them back to Hamburg again. And he knew if he took them back to Hamburg, they'd be annihilated. What?
Yes.
And so he cruised the Atlantic for a couple of weeks, waiting for what to do. And he finally got several other nations, as shown there, to take him. He finally went back without any Jews. But only those who were fortunate enough to get off in England survived. Most of the other countries were eventually taken over by the Nazis, and they did not survive necessarily. I only mentioned this because we left in, so this was in May, and we left in the 1st of July. We spent 30 days on the high seas, going from London direct to San Francisco through the Panama Canal, and we arrived on the 1st of August. The war started the very 1st of September, so we managed to get there by 30 days, which was, go ahead. Next one is Statue of Liberty, right?
I think you don't have it in there. Sorry, you have the returning, you have a picture of us in Hamburg.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I took the family back to Hamburg. Is that it?
Yes.
Huh? John, what isn't in there?
And then, no,
The one,
and
what?
then there's a Mother of Exiles, and then that's it.
There it is, Statue of Liberty.
Yeah, Statue of Liberty, Mother of
Yeah,
Exile.
there it is, yeah.
The wonderful words on the bottom of the Statue of Liberty there. Right? Rabbi, can you?
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Emma Lazarus.
Yeah, I thought, we really don't live up to that anymore today. We really are tight on the borders, and we really don't provide that open door very much, I think. And the last slide by Thomas Jefferson there, which is so true for all of us, really, that all tyranny needs to succeed is for men of goodwill, men and women of goodwill, to remain silent. That's the worst thing we can do is to be silent in the face of injustice.
So true.
And I think I would welcome any kind of questions, but I think that's enough. I know that I'm very honored to speak particularly to this group, and that the rabbi has invited me to join you here. I can't see enough, but somebody.
There is a room filled with people listening with open ears and deep hearts.
But if there really are any questions or particular concerns, if we got time, I don't know if you want to quit or.
Is that okay? Oh, please. Right.
May we have copies of your notes? Would that be?
Oh,
Can you
you
have
have
what?
my copy?
Yeah, I have a few extra copies.
Sure, yeah.
I have a few extra ones. Yeah.
Yes. And now let us invite Pastor Heather Branson to offer some words. Thank you, Paul, for all
Thank you.
you have given.
Thank you,
Sure.
thank you, Rabbi. No,
Blessing. You're a blessing.
I appreciate it very much. I'm glad you're bringing the two groups together.
And more than that. It's a room filled with people who come from many different places, different walks in life. It is truly humbling to be invited again to participate in this service of remembrance of the Holocaust. As a Christian minister, I am well aware that I do not and cannot represent all Christians. You know that as well. But I join with you as a sibling, as someone who shares some of the Abrahamic traditions, as someone who continues to grapple with evil done in the name of God. And so I invite you to join me in a moment of meditation and prayer. God of our ancestors, Spirit of mystery, sacred presence, we gather together in remembrance of the Holocaust, wishing history could be different, wishing that there wasn't the violence and the hate, the ongoing attempts of genocide. We wish we didn't experience the pain, the loss, the anger, the grief. We wish it didn't happen, that it could be different. And yet, year after year, we gather to remember that it did happen, that there are still wounds and scars, tangible and intangible reminders of what has happened, of what truly has happened. Each year, as we gather, we hear the echoes of disbelief, claiming it is fiction, as if the wounds and pain were self-inflicted. And we see the increase of fear manifested again in anti-Semitism and violence. And so our gathering becomes more essential. Holy One, help us be mindful that the Holocaust did not begin as a grand plan of extinction. Rather, it was attention to little differences that grew into stereotypes, sparking embers of fear that were then fanned into flames of hatred. An us versus them mentality enabled the fears and hate to be manipulated by those with power to justify denigrating fellow human beings and committing unimaginable horrors. Sacred Healer, in our gathering, help us remember so that there might be the possibility of healing, a healing from the past and a healing for the present, a healing that comes with consciously choosing a different path that moves us away from hatred, that eschews violence as an answer to fear. Give us courage to stand up to such fear, both in others and in ourselves. Help us do the hard work of not othering so that there aren't those embers of hate and fear. Hashem, help us remember. Help us remember. Put back together that which is broken. And in our remembering, lead us in paths of righteousness and justice for your name's sake. Amen.
So glad that the minister had a chance to stress how this subject really goes through all religions. It's much more concept of humanity than it is any particular religion. I have a Buddhist son-in-law, Linda's husband, who I've learned a great deal from. Well, I realize how much we really have in common. And he's raised his boys to be both Jewish and Buddhist at the same time. And we see the unity really of many religions in this, and it's much more of a human issue than a Jewish issue.
Yeah, to that point, I just, and thank you again, Paul, and thank you for all that are here. I just came from a Slow for Home, which is a refugee resettlement group, and Abdullah and Sophia are Afghani, and they live in San Luis Obispo, and he said that the hills, just as I was driving up north, that these hills remind him of Kabul, and that his wife Sophia said that her mother, when forced to wear certain clothing, was forced to be on all fours when her sandals were not covering the soles of her feet. And to your point, Paul, that this is a universal challenge of hate that must be vigilantly fought against in every generation. And so I continue to have hope that we will continue as a community to come together, not just across the grade, but really all as one, hoping for an America that truly reflects the diversity of humanity. And so while we acknowledge the universal nature of this moment, I do also think it's essential to take this time to recognize the unique horror of the Holocaust of the Jewish people. That yes, there is a universal quality to hate, but that this moment, Shoah, is unique in the horror of humanity, and that is a touchstone, unfortunately, that will always motivate us as Jews to remember this moment explicitly as a horror and tragedy of Judaism, and to fight vigilantly for all those under oppression, under hatred, and in fear of their freedom. And yet, so this moment, we remember the Jews of the Holocaust in this sacred time. The words that I am saying, pray for compassion and God to grant infinite rest with no suffering or pain to the 6 million that we claim have died, that we know died in the Holocaust, and that their memories will always be bound in the bonds of our lives, that we will always continue to remember the horror and remember the beauty of their lives and souls. May they rest in peace. This will be followed by a candle lighting. Mindy, I see you are granddaughter of survivors. That's very powerful. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Chmelik and I'm here on behalf of Assemblymember Dawn Addis. She had the privilege of welcoming Mr. Paul Wolf and his daughter Linda in Sacramento 2 weeks ago when they were recognizing the survivors of Holocaust. And I just want to echo her sentiment of gratitude to Mr. Wolf for continuing to speak up, for continuing to educate all of us, not only about what happened in history, but also in seeing the parallels of what is still happening today and encouraging us and reminding us that we need to use our voice and continue to fight for the good in this world. So I just want to thank you on behalf of her and myself. You're very welcome.
By the way, Don Adams, huh?
Don Addis.
Addis really treated us wonderfully in Sacramento. There was a great honor to be invited to the assembly there, to have a chance to say a few words, and that was very, very kind of her to. I was accompanied by all three of my children. I think it meant a lot to them, and please thank Dawn when you see her.
Thank her. She was very grateful that she came and spoke, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Please rise. El maler hachamim, shochein mamromim, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמות 6 מיליון אחינו ואחיותינו שנהרגו על קידוש השם. בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותם. ונאמר אמן. Compassionate God on high, to our 6 million brother and sisters murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever unfold them in the brace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. May they rest in peace. Let us say, Amen. Thank you. Mindy?
Please be seated. We light our candles. The author of this poem is unknown. We light our candles by passing the light of memory and hope from one to another. Let us honor those whose lights were put out, whose dreams, hopes, and lives were snuffed out before even lived, for the 1.5 million children. We light a candle for the untold millions for whom there is no one to mourn, whose entire families were annihilated and who lie in unmarked graves. Debbie Moeller, if you would please light this candle. We light a candle for those who stood upright while others were bending to unmoral will. For the righteous among the nations who risked and gave their lives to help their fellow human beings. Pastor Heather, if you would please light this candle. We light a candle for those brave soldiers who liberated the camps, who carried the dead and near dead in their arms to a kinder and more humane future, and for those who served with the Allied forces to put an end to tyranny and oppression. Chief Scott, would you please light this candle? We light a candle for the nearly 6 million Jews and for the 6 million non-Jews who perished in a planned system of destruction the scale of which had never been even imagined. Jan and Stephen Marks, would you please light this candle? We light a candle for those who live, even now, under the yoke of oppression, in places where the threat of genocide is real and ever present. Jerome and Rita Becker, if you would please light this candle. Rabbi Micah.
In a moment, I'll ask you to rise as we say a special Kaddish Yatom in honor of all of those that lost their lives in the Shoah. Next to each of these words, we'll hear other names of these camps that were mentioned today. And we pray that Oseh Shalom Bimromav, that there is a sense of peace in the heavens that can give us a sense of strength and resolve to fight the challenges of today. I ask you now to rise for Kaddish Yatom. Kadal Auschwitz, V'yit Kadash Lodz, Shemei Rabbah Ponar, V'alma Divra Chirutei Babiyar, V'yamlich Malchutei Maidanek, B'chayechon Uv'yomechon Birknau, Uv'chayei Dechol Beit Yisrael Kovno, Ba'agala Uvizman Kariv Yanauska V'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Leolam Ulmei Almaya. Yitparach V'yishtabach Theresienstadt V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam Buchenwald V'yitnasei V'yithadar Treblinka V'yit Ale, V'yit Halal, Vilna, Shemei de Kudsha, Brichu, Bergen-Belsen, Le'ela, Mauthausen, Min Kol Birchata V'Shirata, Dachau, Tush Bachata V'Nechemata, Minsk, Da Amiran Be'alma, Warsaw, V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'imromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. You may be seated. We never finish a ceremony. We never study any Torah that ends only on the negative. We always turn to hope. We always turn to the future. We turn to a soldier in the Israeli army, Hannah Senesh, as she, in the end, fought against the Nazis in World War II, that sang this beautiful song, Eli, Eli. Eli, Shelo yigamer leolam, hachov ve'hayam, של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם, החוף והים, רשרוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. O Lord, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, all humans, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, of our hearts. Cindy Dixon, thank you so much for your accompanying. We're going to hear the theme song from Schindler's List, followed again by Sandy Oblonsky with closing remarks. I want to thank all of our dignitaries, and I want to thank this community along with our members of Beth David. Thank you, Ort Safon. Thank you, community of Atascadero. May we always remember, may we never forget.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Rabbi Micah, for bringing us through a beautiful program. My profound thanks to Mr. Wolf and Linda. Thank you so much for your sharing. I want to thank everybody that helped put this together. The committee was wonderful. Thank you so much for the community for showing up. It means everything. And I just want to say, I hope you're moved. I hope you walk away not allowing silence and not allowing this to ever be forgotten. Thank you. There are snacks in the back. Please feel free to mingle and enjoy. Thank you so much. Thank you.